Hello, I'm Jason Breitkoff. This is the Endeavor video show and audio podcast. I'm here with Nikhil Thakkar, and we are discussing building authentic relationships with your teachers. Nikhil, how you doing?
Good, how about you?
I'm doing very well. So, I know this is a topic that means a lot to you. Let's just start straight in. What are some thoughts that you have about building authentic relationships with your teachers? What does that mean, and how do you do that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are kind of two ways to think about this, right? One, in terms of the college application process and why building authentic relationships with your teachers matter within that context, within the world of college admissions, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of why building relationships matter at all, like in life in general, right? And I'd love to talk about the second, the latter, a lot more than I'd like to talk about the former, right? But I think just to keep the video short, keep the podcast short for anybody who's listening at home, let's start kind of with the college world part, and then maybe we can segue into the latter half.
I think that's a good idea.
So I guess if you step back and ask yourself, right, what are the components of the college application that you do not control? One of the biggest components of that category is teacher recommendations and the guidance recommendation letters, right? That's something that every student, more or less, who applies to a university in this country or even internationally, if that's something you're looking for, right, will have to confront at one point or another. You're going to have to go to a teacher and ask them for a recommendation letter, probably two teachers and a guidance counselor, right? And so if you break the recommendation letter down into a science, for lack of a better term, right? What makes a good recommendation letter? What makes a recommendation letter stand out in the admissions pool, in the room of the admissions committee when they're making these decisions, right? And the way that I always like to kind of categorize this and explain to students is the best recommendation letters are those that kind of demonstrate an authentic relationship between a student and a teacher. And kind of broadening that a little bit, the best recommendation letters are those that demonstrate that the recommender really knows the interests, the values, the beliefs, everything about kind of who they're recommending, right?
So that's what you mean by authentic?
Authentic, exactly. Authentic meaning that it's not just somebody who you've asked for a recommendation letter because you're applying to college and you need a recommendation letter. It's not something that a teacher necessarily should fill the check boxes for. There's no good, and for you, those of you listening on the audio podcast, I'm using my quotes, my bunny ears. There's no good recommendation letter format or formula. There's not something that a teacher should, go through and be like, first I'm going to talk about this, then this, then this. And on the same side, the student shouldn't be expecting a teacher to first talk about this, then this, then this, in terms of any checklist. Because what that becomes is this very rudimentary and data-driven, formulaic recommendation letter. And what that does in the admissions committee is makes you look like everybody else. It makes the recommendation letter look like everybody else.
It's generic.
Right? It's generic. That's a good way of saying it, right?
Right. So when you're looking for recommendations from a teacher, because again, the guidance counselor, you don't have a choice, as you've alluded to previously just a few minutes ago. But for the teachers, you get to choose which teacher writes your letters of recommendation. You ask that person or those two people. So what I'm hearing you say is that not necessarily the teacher who's giving you the best grades, but the teacher with whom you have an actual human relationship.
Right. So let's get into which types of teachers that you should or who you should ask for a recommendation letter. So the way I always like to explain it is ask those teachers who you feel are more like your friends than are just your academic instructors. Right? And the reason I say it like that is because if you're asking for a recommendation letter from somebody who's just seen you and known you within the context of grading your paper or grading your test, right? That's not as authentic of a relationship if they know you within the classroom, outside of the classroom, what you're into, extracurricular wise, what you are interested in terms of just in the world, like whether that's political issues or social issues or what you really care about, what gets you out of bed in the morning, right? Those types of things. If a teacher's familiar with that, they know you to a much deeper level. And with that comes the ability to write a much more authentic, much more realistic recommendation, one that comes from the heart versus the mind.
Right, and you and I specifically, have previously talked about when you're, as a student, creating your college application to be A, honest, and B, authentic in telling your personal story. So matching up teachers with recommendations who are going to be able to speak about things that you're already touching on in other aspects of your application is only going to reinforce and strengthen the story you're telling to college admissions officers.
Yeah, and I think it's a perfect segue into one myth that a lot of people, believe when it comes to recommendation letters, which is I need to ask a teacher who has graded me in a class with an A, right? Like I've gotten an A in the class that I'm asking for the recommendation from, right? Versus a B or a C, right? And I would actually take the opposite standpoint, which is if you got a B in a class and you're used to getting A's, right? Chances are you've been after school to get help with that teacher, right? Or with a tutor, or you've gone to the teacher after school and said, what can I improve on? Why am I not doing as well as I expected myself to do? And what can I kind of do outside of school to improve my grade, right? Like you're talking to the teacher a lot more than, for lack of a better word, an easy A class, right? And with that constant talking and constant kind of connection, you develop this relationship that is much more, fine-tuned, nuanced, and they really understand you on a human level much more than if you were just kind of another person in their class who got an A, right?
Right.
And so with that, right, what would I kind of recommend to students who are not sure which teacher to ask and which teacher that they should get a recommendation from, right? So I would always say, if you have nobody right now, no teacher right now that you've formed an authentic relationship with, then start seeking out those authentic relationships. And how do you tangibly do that? I would suggest meeting with that teacher on a regular basis, and a fairly regular basis, meaning maybe you can ask a teacher, do you mind staying after school once every 2 weeks to kind of catch up with me? Not necessarily just on the academic portion of the class, but on other just interests of mine. And I see you as a mentor, right? I see you as somebody who I look up to, and as an inspiration, I kind of want to get your insight and your perspective on things. And as I say that, I want to kind of reiterate this idea of authenticity. This isn't a game. You're not trying to go to a teacher and manipulate him or her into writing a good recommendation letter. What you should be doing with these meetings, and the intention that you should approach these meetings with, is the idea that they are your mentor. They are an inspiration. They are somebody who you look up to and you can learn from. And if you choose to select your teachers carefully and correctly, you are actually looking for teachers who have similar interests as you do, or have similar perspectives as you do, and just people who you really, for lack of a better word, vibe with, right?
Right.
And it's somebody that just understands you. And so I would set up those regular meetings to kind of communicate with one or two teachers on that much more personal level than just your classic getting an A in the class and not really talking to the teacher after school.
Right. Well, that ties into the other aspect of what we started with at the very beginning of this, which is creating authentic relationships with teachers for reasons beyond just application.
I mean, 100%. That's something.
Recommendations, but just in general, like one of the things that I think is an obstacle for what you're talking about is a lot of students don't feel like they can approach a teacher, don't feel like they can talk to a teacher human to human.
Yeah.
I mean, it's silly, but you look at little kids, like kids in second, third, even as late as fourth grade. I've spoken to students that age, and there are some of them that are, you're talking about myths, believe that the teacher lives at school.
Yeah.
That when they come there in the morning, the teacher is just, climbs out of a cubby hole and lives there. They don't see teachers as real human beings, as people with hopes, dreams, fears, fantasies, a life outside of school. I work through my job, I get sent to schools, and I work with the teachers at various different high schools. And I was at one recently. My assignment there just ended with the March SAT, and I'm there in the building, and I'm interacting with the other teachers. And I was speaking with one teacher, and she was telling me about her weekend plans, and she was going hiking with her boyfriend. And that's normal. That's what people do.
Right.
She has a life. She's a real human being. And I think sometimes students have a hard time seeing that because they see teachers only as authority figures, as obstacles to their happiness. In the same way that some people, see their mother and father only as mom, and that's all mom is just a mom, or dad. That's all dad is, just a dad. And seeing these other people as humans, as regular people, and trying to connect with them on that level. it's hard to get out of our own heads. It's
Right.
hard to get out of our own way.
Which is actually, I do want to interrupt you for 1 second and
Sure.
say this as I look into the camera, right? Which is, if you set out throughout this entire college application process, and we're talking about recommendation letters within the context of recommendation letters, if you set out with the mindset and with the approach to game the system, to manipulate the system, to, as I said earlier, select carefully those teachers who you think are going to give you the best recommendation letters, not because you've built that authentic relationship, but because you're pretending to build that authentic relationship, you will have failed before you started.
I agree
and it's as
completely.
plain as that. Not only will
Yeah.
you have failed in the college application process, because you're not going to be able to build those authentic relationships, because that kind of game of college admissions will cloud every single thing that you do and every single interaction you have. And authenticity is not something that can be kind of manufactured. It's
Right.
something that happens organically. So if you're setting out to do this with any sort of malintent, you will have failed before you started. And then Jason, I'm sure, is going to continue
Right.
on the actual idea that that's not even good to do in life.
No, right, because the thing is, like, let's say you're doing this, what is the end game for that?
Right.
You're applying to go to college, and what folks who are trapped in that are doing is they're living out a fantasy. They're applying to a school because of a famous name, because mom and dad went there and they know this name. They're not thinking about day-to-day life there.
Right.
When you go away to college and you live on campus, you have to live there. You go to bed there. You wake up there. You eat your meals there. You have peers and a life. And these are real people. So by trying to game a system, you're creating this false narrative where it's part of a fantasy. It's not real.
Right.
And that's the same thing in high school, where when you're interacting with your teachers, they're real people. And it's not just to show them respect and treat them as human beings in the same way that you want to be treated, but it's also to maximize your ability to learn. When you communicate well with teachers, when you treat them with the same dignity and respect that you deserve as a human being, then you're able to open a channel where what they're trying to share with you means more and is more likely to have a positive effect on you. When you're in class and the teacher's talking or lecturing or doing a presentation and they're going too fast, and if you have the self-advocacy and the courage to say, Miss Jones, Mr. Smith, you're going a little too fast for me. Would you please just repeat that or go a little slower? I want to make sure I get it. A lot of students are afraid to do that because, I don't want to interrupt the teacher, or they're going to take it the wrong way, they're going to get their feelings hurt. I've been in that situation as an instructor, as a teacher, and I want the students to get it. You got to think about what a teacher is and what a person has to decide in order to become a teacher. A person has to decide, I'm going to get a lot of education, spend a lot of money to get lots of degrees to earn very little money. So they're not in it for the big bucks. They're not in it for fame. You don't have, some Sunday night at the end of February, a giant award show in Hollywood for teachers. You don't have championships with big trophies at the Super Bowl for teachers. You don't have parades down Broadway through Times Square for teachers. So they're doing this in an environment that's mostly thankless, for low pay, and a lot of grief. And they're doing it for the love of education for the most part. I mean, yes, everyone has that one story about that one bad teacher. Great, that one bad teacher, but how many teachers have you had in your life? From kindergarten through college, multiple classes in high school and college, how many teachers have you had? And if you're going to tell me about that one teacher where you had a bad experience, that means you had all those good teachers that you're not telling me about. And they're all doing it for the love of learning, for the love of students, for the love of children. And they're real human beings. And they're there and they want to help you. So if you take the time to say, I need help, or I'm not getting it, can I have a little extra attention? Can I have a little time to spend with you? They're going to love it. They want to meet you halfway. They want you to reach out to them. They want to have a human conversation. And as you get to know teachers, in my high school experience, there are teachers with whom I had deep, deep conversations as a high school student. I was a high school student, so therefore I wasn't that deep a human being. I was me. So about film, about theater, about literature, about politics, about life, that really helped me make decisions about who I am and who I want to be. They didn't tell me what to do. They didn't tell me who to be. But talking to them opened some doors and some windows and allowed me to explore myself. And I think that's an opportunity that some students are denying themselves. And so that's, for me, even more important than the who am I going to ask for an application, even though that is an important part of a specific process, the college application process.
100%. And I think, so the way to kind of think about it, right, is a good recommendation letter is a byproduct of doing everything Jason just said. And on the flip side, you will never be able to get a good recommendation letter without doing what Jason just said.
Yeah.
Right? And so it really does come down fundamentally to the fact that, and you know this if you watched our other content, listen to our other podcasts, right? Read our articles on Medium or wherever it is, anything that we put out is never fabricated, it's never fake. And we really do fundamentally believe here that authenticity matters.
Absolutely.
In every single thing that you do, right? So like this is not a system that you want to game. This is not something that you're trying to manufacture, right? Whether it is a recommendation letter or an extracurricular list or course selection, whatever it is, if you set out with, good intention and you're doing it the right way.
With
right?
honesty and self-respect.
With honesty, with self-respect, right? A good application would be the byproduct of that. Because if you think about who is actually reading the application, right? It is an admissions committee made up of people who also have lives, who care about real human beings, right?
And the thing that I think, especially because the admissions officers with whom I've spoke over the years in my role as an educator and a test prep instructor and a part-time guidance counselor, college counselor, when I've had conversations with admissions officers, the thing that they tell me is when they finish an application, if they get a sense of, wow, I want to meet this person.
Right. Yep.
That person is a person they're looking to accept into that college.
Right.
Wow, that person's interesting. That person has an interesting story. Not that person climbed Mount Everest or that person, invented a better mousetrap. It's that is a real person who did some interesting stuff. And I bet if I met with that person and had a cup of coffee or a cup of tea with that person, I'd have a good conversation.
Yep.
That's the person they want to accept, not the person who's got picture-perfect numbers but no personality.
Right.
And that person may get into school, and their numbers may be so amazing that they can't be denied, but there's a lot of different people who get into college and go to college, and a freshman class is a community. So there's not only going to be the super number people.
Right.
There's going to be real people.
Right. Exactly. So I guess to sum up, build real, authentic relationships with teachers.
Yeah.
One way to kind of get started with that is to reach out to some of your favorite teachers, some of the teachers who you feel you connect with.
Actually, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to say something
ahead.
like what you just said. It's reach out to your favorite teachers. The funny thing is, it's not always the favorite teachers, but I know what you're saying. But it's also like some of the best relationships I had with teachers in high school were with teachers where, especially in math, where math wasn't my strongest suit in high school. One of my best relationships was with my pre-calculus and calculus teacher, Mr. DiMattia, where our relationship was built on me coming to him for help and just begging for help and his willingness to go that extra mile and really tutor me, get me hooked up with peer tutors, and did everything he could to help me get through calculus. And I did not end up using him for my recommendation, even though he would have been a great choice, and I did seriously think about it. But again, I was going with that authentic story, and so I went with my history teacher, the director of the musical theater.
Because that dovetailed a lot better with your story,
yeah,
right?
But he was a great guy, and he would have written as good and personal and in-depth a recommendation for me as would have the teachers that I asked.
Right.
Who I asked.
Right. Just an interesting thought off the dome right now as I'm thinking about this, right? Put in the comments below if you're kind of interested in a future series about just recommendation letters and the best recommendation letters. It might just be a student sitting here, myself included, reading out loud their recommendation letter. So you can kind of get a feel for what we mean by an authentic relationship that yields as a byproduct a good recommendation letter. And that might be helpful. Let us know in the comments below.
Right, and one other thing, I do have planned another video with one of our best guidance counselors, Dr. Montañez, who's been on the audio podcast a couple times, and she's going to talk about it from the guidance counselor's perspective.
Awesome.
About writing, because again, your teachers you get to pick, but your guidance counselor you don't get to pick.
Right.
Your guidance counselor is assigned to you, so he or she has to write a letter of recommendation. So we're going to talk about it from her perspective.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, go ahead.
Thank you. Nikhil, Jason, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. As Nikhil has plainly said, please leave comments if you're watching the video, below the video, if you're listening in whatever podcast app you're listening to, or iTunes. And we're really looking forward to that. Not only does it help us understand what you're looking for and what you need out of these series of episodes, but it will give us a chance to communicate with you and respond.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.